When it comes to sandwiches, many are remarkably unremarkable. They're usually just toppings and condiments slapped or slathered in between two slices of Wonder Bread in an attempt to make something tastier than instant ramen, but just as low effort. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them, they're just nothing to write home about. However, there are a few sandwiches that transcend the medium and become something greater than the sum of their parts. In this category, one sandwich in particular reigns supreme, the Vietnamese banh mi. This is not just my favorite sandwich in the world, it's easily one of my top 5 favorite foods of all time. Now, we've established that this is the greatest sandwich in the world, but let's go over its history because it's a little complicated. You see, its history begins with the French occupation of Vietnam, which lasted from 1887 to 1954. The French colonists introduced new crops to the region, but it was quickly discovered that wheat grows about as well in Vietnam as mangoes do in northern Canada, so wheat had to be imported from Europe. This caused the French to deem bread too expensive to be given to the Vietnamese locals. While this did change during World War I, when French forces seized goods from Germany and allowed a flood of European goods into Vietnamese markets, the French still would not allow the people of Vietnam to make any changes to French cuisine, which meant that sandwiches made with baguettes were still prepared in more traditional French styles. In fact, the banh mi as we know it wouldn't come to exist until the 50s, specifically 1954, a year which saw two monumental events in Vietnamese history. The first being France's defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and the second being the partition of Vietnam, the latter of which sent millions of migrants to Saigon from the northern regions of the country. Among these migrants were food vendors who began putting meats, herbs, and pickled vegetables into baguettes, creating the banh mi sandwich. Its popularity in Saigon exploded because it was the perfect portable meal for the hustle and bustle of city life. It would later make its way across the world at the end of the Vietnam War, when Vietnamese refugees fled to cities such as Houston, Seattle, and San Diego. Over the next couple of decades, as the popularity of Vietnamese food would grow among Americans and Europeans, the banh mi would become one of the most beloved sandwiches in the world. Now, it's time for me to address a little bit of an elephant in the room. When something great comes from a place of suffering, I don't think that its creation necessarily justifies that suffering. I mean, I don't think that Vincent van Gogh deserved to battle mental illness just because he created amazing art while struggling with it. And I sure as hell don't think that the creation of my favorite sandwich justifies like 70 years of colonialism. This is especially relevant since I'm not Vietnamese, and this isn't the story of my own oppression. That being said, I also understand that many people see the banh mi as a symbol of the fall of colonialism, and that by taking the culture imposed upon them and turning it into something uniquely their own, the people of Vietnam were able to say a big fuck you to the French colonists. And personally, I think that's something worth celebrating. Now that we understand a little bit about the banh mi's background, it's time to actually make this thing. Actually, wait, hold up. There's a couple more things I need to address before moving forward. First of all, this sandwich, the one that I'm making in this video, this is not the greatest sandwich in the world. It is just a tribute. So with that in mind, you should really check out a legit shit version before trying mine. Helen's Recipes has several fantastic banh mi videos, and also has a great recipe for the Vietnamese baguettes that are traditionally used here. Also, I want to mention that now would be a great time to order a banh mi sandwich from your favorite local Vietnamese restaurant. Restaurants all over the country are being affected by the COVID-19 crisis right now, and unfortunately, due to ignorance from a significant portion of the general public, Asian-owned restaurants are seeing the worst of it. So, if you have the means and can do so safely, go out and order a banh mi and a bubble tea to go, and leave a generous tip. A couple local favorites I want to shout out are Dat Pho in Spring, Texas, and V's Bistro in Humble, Texas. The pho from these places has saved me from plenty of hangovers, so I really want to repay the favor however I can. On another note, you're actually going to see me fuck up a few times while cooking this, but it still turned out great, so this is a great lesson on persevering in the kitchen, or at least that's what I'm telling myself. Finally, please don't at me about the plastic cutting mats. My grandma uses them on her wood cutting board, and her house, her rules. Now, let's actually cook this thing. Okay, so what I'm doing to start out here is awkwardly peeling and slicing a couple of carrots and like a third of a daikon. You can julienne these into little matchsticks, but I like them to be about the size of a standard fast food french fry. Next, you want to put these in a container that's not made of aluminum and pour a bottle of seasoned rice vinegar over them. Then cover them and let them hang out at room temperature until it's time for final assembly. If you can't get seasoned rice vinegar, just use regular rice wine vinegar and add a little salt and sugar. Once you have your vegetables pickling, it's time to make the marinade. First, grate or crush a couple cloves of garlic, followed by like an inch of fresh ginger, which I forgot to film myself grating. Then, add hoisin sauce, soy sauce, Maggi seasoning, sambal olek, and a dash of sesame oil, as well as some neutral oil like grapeseed or canola. Next, you want to add in a couple more aromatics in the form of a shallot and some lemongrass. But here's my first mistake of the video. You see, I had never worked with lemongrass before, and I thought I could just pulse it in a food processor along with the shallot and basically turn it into a sofrito. However, since lemongrass is super tough, it basically just bounced around inside the food processor. I eventually just decided to pick up the chunks of lemongrass and dice them as finely as I could, and put them in a bouquet garni along with the shallot. So please, do me a favor and grate the goddamn lemongrass on a microplane, or just skip the hassle altogether and use plain old lemon zest. Once you have the marinade whipped up, it's time to deal with the pork, which is where I made my second fuck up. You see, I got a pork tenderloin, which conveniently came split into pieces that were the right size for me. However, I think it would be better to use pork loin instead of tenderloin, especially since pork loin typically has one big piece of silver skin on it, as opposed to like 12 smaller pieces of silver skin on this tenderloin, which made it much more annoying to remove. Once you do have the silver skin on your pork of choice removed, you're going to want to make diagonal 1/8-inch deep cuts into the meat, and then repeat the process going the other way to make a crosshatch pattern. Scoring the meat like this is mainly to make it look cool, but it also has the added benefit of allowing the marinade to penetrate better. Oh, by the way, although pork is my favorite protein here, feel free to experiment with this. This would be awesome with chicken thighs, and if you're not into meat, this is one of the best marinades I know for grilled tofu. Anyways, once your meat has been scored, transfer it into the marinating vessel of your choice and pour over your marinade. However, this is where I realized that I actually didn't make enough marinade, so I quickly whipped up another batch and also decided that the bouquet garni was stupid. I cut it open and threw the lemongrass and shallot into the marinade, hoping that it wouldn't make a difference in the final product, and luckily for me, it didn't. Let that sit at room temperature for about an hour, which is the perfect time to make the spread for your sandwich. In a bowl that's preferably wider than this little Tupperware container, combine some high quality mayonnaise, sambal olek, hoisin, and 2 crushed or grated cloves of garlic. Whoops, almost forgot a few dashes of Maggi seasoning. If you're only going to make one thing from this video, it should be the spicy Asian mayo, because this shit has gone on like 90% of the sandwiches I've made since filming this. Set the Asian mayonnaise in the fridge until needed. At this point, my meat was just about finished marinating, so I spread butter onto a couple of French loaves and stuck them into a 375°F oven, and definitely, absolutely did not forget about them while cooking the pork. While the buns are toasting, get a couple of cast iron skillets preheating over medium heat. Then decide if you need to trim the pork to make it fit in the pans, which I did. Then place it in the pans with a little bit of grapeseed or canola oil. Personally, I recommend turning the pork frequently and basting it with the excess marinade in between flips. Just make sure that you don't add this marinade after the pork is done cooking, because you'll give yourself food poisoning. If you have an instant read thermometer, check the internal temperature every few minutes, and once it reaches 140 to 145°F, remove it from the pan and let it rest for at least 5 minutes, during which time you should try and remember anything that you've forgotten. In my case, I'd forgotten to chop scallions, a jalapeno, and cilantro, as well as slicing a cucumber into ribbons. Once your pork is rested and all your forgotten ingredients have been accounted for, it's time to thinly slice the pork, then prepare for final assembly. First, spread your Asian mayonnaise on both sides of the bread. And no, I didn't have to use a sourdough loaf because I forgot the French bread in the oven and burned it. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? Anyways, you then want to lay down your pork slices, then layer your cilantro, jalapeños, scallions, cucumber, and pickled carrots and daikon in whatever order makes you happy. From here, just slice your sandwich and enjoy. My version may not be the world's greatest sandwich, but it's the best sandwich I've ever made. So good, in fact, that I forgot to film a closing shot of me eating the damn thing.